Everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Small Biz Stories. And you've got me, your host, Dr. LL, here with Nathan Yeung of Find Your Audience. And you're thinking, that sounds like a problem I have. This might be a good episode to dial in. You betcha. He's got everything from the consumer psychology angle to marketing, what you should do and not do. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's always fun, right? We get all of these different opportunities to be able to talk to folks like yourself who just want to add value and say, hey, here's some really interesting things people can do. So before we even get into it, just to prove to our audience this is what we do, I'd like you to start the show with your best tip for go to market for our entrepreneurs.
The best tip I can give to anyone is perfectionism is going to be the biggest failure you have when you go to market. There is no point for you to try to bring to market a product or a marketing campaign that's 99% perfect. It's just not worth it. Let me say this with one caveat. If you for some reason have the budget to do a Super Bowl ad and that's your campaign, okay, you got to do the 99%. But I have a feeling most of you that are listening, you're not spending millions and millions of dollars on your first placement. You're not going to get a ton of reach. You need to get validation. So just go out there. 80% product is going to take your business farther, give you better observations and learnings than trying to do something perfect.
Oh, amen to that. And this is a shout out to my mentor of the last 27 years, dare I say, Dennis, who had always said that because we worked together. The first company that we were in, where he was my boss, it was a tech company and it was all about how do we go to market. And he's like, it's not features, it's not functions. That's not what we do. And you're all scientists and you need to stop it. He goes, we can't be 99.99999% ready. We will never, ever get out of the gate, and that has haunted me, ever since. Now I'm like 80%. Yeah, sounds good. Let's go.
It's so true. It's so true. We get caught up in that.
Oh, indeed. So for the folks who are listening through traditional channels like Spotify, iHeartRadio, and whatnot, listening to the podcast, they don't have the visual experience. So I'd like you to describe whatever you want about your funky background and green lights, about yourself and where you are. So folks go like, okay, that's the voice of Nathan. Okay, I got the vibe.
Yeah, so I'm sitting in my Vancouver home. I live between Vancouver and Toronto, Canada. So my little setup here is a little bit more podcasty. I got a little background. I've got some books that I like. I have little gifts from people that I've, and some client stuff as well. I have an MRE package actually came from one of my good friends who I think just finished his tenure, 30 years in the U.S. Army. So I have that over there. A little bit about myself. I've been in marketing, gosh, probably well over 10 years now. I work with some of the largest SaaS companies across Canada. The largest client I have is Constellation Software, where we work with, a small portion of, I think, they have 600, 600 plus software companies that they work with. And we really do everything from being your marketing team to being a support team that just enhances a marketing manager. Really, what we're trying to do is bridge that gap where, it's hard to get your first marketing manager. So rather than hiring a marketing manager, you can hire a marketing team for the same, for the same price. And that's really the niche we fit in. Um, my personal background, I think, if you were to say, hey, Nate, what's your biggest technical skill sets right now? I would have two. Um, and one's weird right now because SEO has changed. I've been doing SEO, I think now longer than 16 years.
Wow.
And then recently, for many of you that know, generative AI is such a hot topic. I run a marketing agency. It's an existential threat to my business. And because of that, I have become fairly well versed in AI. I think I'm subscribed to probably over 14 tools. Our company uses anything from workflows to direct LLM tools like ChatGPT, Claude, Minimax, and other agentic tools. So now I also talk on AI. I was not ever planning to, was not my goal. But because I run an agency and it's an existential threat, I suppose I just kind of fell into becoming a champion and an expert in generative AI.
Ooh, excellent. So lots of touch points here. So I'm always excited to talk to all of our guests, but talking to a fellow Canuck, right? Another person from Canada, north of the border, and a fellow marketeer, this is going to be fun. So let's get into some things. You talk about AI as that existential threat to marketing. And this is not a shallow statement. I've talked to a lot of my folks that I've known over the years. They've run their marketing agencies, social media firms, and whatnot. They are constantly having to pivot, but all of them have said that in the last year, they've had to pivot like sharp right turn, trying to figure out what it is because a lot of their clients are saying, well, yeah, I can just use AI for that. I'll create the images, it'll auto post, it'll set everything. I don't need you. Everything's perfect. What are you really seeing with respect to the results of AI generated content and posting versus human generated content and posting?
So I think right now there's still a small opportunity where, and I say opportunity, really what I mean is a little bit more runway for agencies to feel like AI is not going to take their job. And the reason I say that is because there's a ton of, I think LLMs are plateauing a little bit, and I predicted that a couple last years, and I've been wrong, so don't hold me to that. But I think when you think about, there's a lot of benchmarks that talk about how many focused hours an AI tool can do right now. And when ChatGPT came out, the benchmark was it can do like a minute long focused task really well. And then that progressed to 30 minutes. And I think right now we're at somewhere like 2.5 hours, to up to 4 hours. And what's really scary is that the difference between that 1 minute and that 4 hours, in my opinion, is the level of expertise and the complexity that is required. So when ChatGPT first came out, it could give you a caption really well. And now, where we are with complex reasoning and agentic models, we now have the ability for it to do a campaign. We have the ability for it to develop captions and copywriting towards that campaign. It has the ability to break down that campaign into multiple elements, and now it's able to do that 2 to 4 hour focused work task fairly well. Now, is it producing a 99 or 100% product, which I still say still needs a bit of human touch? No. But is it getting you to pretty darn close to an 80% product? I'm going to say yes. And if LLMs continue to progress, and which they will, is it going to get close to 90% in the next year? I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to say that that's going to continue being the case. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of companies think it's easy. It's not. You are going to be investing, and I'm exaggerating, so don't take this number, but it's just for illustrative purposes. You are going to be spending, call it 300 hours to save 60% of your time on an hour task. So don't think you're going to go in on an LLM tool and solve that 1 hour task in 1 hour. You're not. You're going to spend, I'm saying 300. It might not be. It might be 24, hours of focused work to solve that. But regardless, it's going to be a decent amount of work. It's not a turnkey solution. And so that's what I'm seeing. There's a over indexing of an overconfidence bias, as we were just talking about this, that these tools will solve things. They will, but it's taking a lot more effort. And a lot of companies, one, don't enable their staff well enough to do it. And two, they give up too early. And essentially they don't bother because right now all the tools do certain things very well. So you actually have to use a workflow. And what that really means is, or that's a fancy word for, you're going to use multiple tools to get the outcome you want.
There you go. So, uh, where to even begin? So, there's a few pieces within that, right? Number one, first, no AI tool that I've seen is out of the box and ready to go. And I have the opportunity, I get invited to beta test various tools here and there. And I always come back with, good, but. And so I want to share that with the audience on what is required. I know I hear from a lot of my clients who are trying to set up these AI automations. Oh, guaranteed it's easy, whatever. And then the software that they bought includes 8 hours of customization or setup. And the 8 hours is basically just trying to find time to schedule meetings. And then, like, oops, sorry, we're almost out of time. We did an intake discovery call and DIY. You're on your own. Here's some resources. Here's our library. Go figure it out. And then the clients get overwhelmed and start spinning. It's not that they're not good tools, It's just the amount of customization and integration, and then the learning curve to actually use it effectively and efficiently is way, way, way higher than anyone's letting on. And so I'm glad you've highlighted that. Say a bit more about that, Nate.
Yeah, it's just that, a lot of, again, like they think that it comes out of the box and they get frustrated. I'll give you a good example. Um, I spent, I'm gonna say 5 days to figure out how I can put anyone, and I really mean anyone, into any style image, whether you want to be in Harry Potter or Star Wars or Star Trek or Mission Impossible with, I'm going to say, 95% accuracy to your face. And this is not using something called Comfy UI. So just so everyone is aware, there are other tools where you have to have it locally, and that's a pain, and then you have to get a server. So I'm trying to use everything online because my point is to get it scalable for my team. And it took me about 5 days to figure out a workflow. And now, if you were to ask me, learn to do that for you, I could probably do that in about 15 minutes. I could put you into any environment without any images, like just your face. So I could take your screenshot right now, and I could put you into any environment, and I can make it pretty darn close to your face. Um, and it took me 5 days to do that. If you were to ask a designer to do that, I'm going to say that's at least, you know, reasonably a full day's worth of work. So 5 days to replace a full day's worth of work, which now I can do about 15 minutes. Most people are going to spend about 3 hours and say this is bunk, doesn't work. So I give up. And so I think it's right. People just you just have to go with the expectation. It's not one tool that's going to do everything for you.
No, and I'm in the process of writing a graphic novel with my mentor that I mentioned earlier in our podcast. And same thing, he's like, well, okay, LL, so you're pretty quick with the AI and the tech and all this kind of stuff. Go do. It shouldn't take you long. Let's meet in a couple of days. And we met, and he said, okay, where's the graphic novel? I've written chapter one. We worked on that together. That's all edited. That's ready to go. Show me it rendered. I'm like, are you kidding me? I haven't even standardized the characters yet because you can't get consistency with respect to the images. You get one, you finally get a character you like, and then you say, recreate this character wearing the same clothes in this pose, blah, 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 add some of the details. And then what was really weird is that the characters kept coming back because I was using Disney Pixar style, and they kept coming back with these funky apparitions of these little cartoon monsters that had big googly eyes. So the big googly eye characters would be in the arms of the character. And I'm like, what are we doing? And
Yeah.
to your point, it took me three different tools where I feed it into one AI tool, put it in another, render it, make modifications, edit it, and spit it out on the other side, and then enter it into Canva into a set of templates that I've created to be able to load the different frames and put it. I mean, it's just you need 10 different softwares.
You do. And if you want to get that 95% product that you kind of assume AI will do, that's exactly what it's going to take.
Yeah, there we go. Now, let's flip this around. So, I think there is a place for AI in all of this. And as much as it poses an existential threat, really, to society as we know it, particularly small businesses, and you look at even Mark Benioff, right, the CEO of Salesforce, he's on a mission to create the world's first autonomous digital workforce. And he's doing it with Agent Force. Agent Force is taking out thousands of people with like every swath. So there's a lot of threat there. So we've all got to find a way to get ahead of it and then use it to our benefit rather than be completely left behind, right, in this era of great replacement. So let's move on. So the consumer psychology is something I think is really fascinating in your background. What do people think is happening with respect to consumer interest and consumer intent? But it's not. Like, I think what do we have wrong is the vendors were like, yeah, I think my customers will buy because, but we're totally, totally way off base.
That's great. I think what is interesting is assuming that customers come to you knowing what features solve their problem and the fact that they've taken the time to understand that. Um, and I think a lot of the times that's why you'll see comparison tables is because it's actually an education tool. So for anyone that has ever, for any of you small businesses that have, call it low ticket items, call it sub $100, that's a quick transaction. There's not a lot of thinking involved around there. But if you start looking at any SaaS company or any service company that's selling anything but, 5, 10, 15, $20,000 a month, you are going to have a little bit more requirements. And the fact is that when you have more requirements, people tend to have a bit more diligence in trying to understand everything that you do and how that actually is going to drive them towards that outcome. And I think as vendors of any sort, whether you're a SaaS or a service, I think we have a lot of assumptions to assume that they actually know. They actually know exactly what features solve what problems. And I'm going to say that's actually completely incorrect. And that's the reason why there's certain industries where there are nuances called brokers. The whole brokerage model in itself is actually the fact that people don't actually have the time to do the diligence to understand how to make a good decision. A broker is actually just filling that gap because people don't actually have time. So, for example, if you are building a house, how many contractors are there in your city? Probably like four, five, 600. How are you possibly going to normalize all four or 500 to make an intellectual decision? A true, fully diligent intellectual. It's not possible. You don't have enough time. And so, as a vendor, you have to go in with the mindset, actually assuming they have no idea what they're thinking about, and you need to create a frame for them. And I hate this term because there's some people that talk about this in relationships and frame. I'm just going to say framing is creating a box of expectations. And what you are trying to do is, in the consumer psychology perspective, you are trying to get them to actually self-confirm a belief. And you do that by giving them choice. Oh, that sounds weird, giving them choice. What I'm trying to say is when you don't give someone choice, they don't have a frame. What I mean by that is if they don't have a frame is because they only have one point to look at. So if you are a service provider and you go, I have one subscription, $59 a month. That's it, nothing else. People go, I don't really know if that's the right price. I don't know what I'm getting for that. I don't know any differences. When you give them three prices, the reason why that framing works is because whether or not it actually even makes sense, they're going to look at the $19 one, the $59 one, and the $199, and they're going to make their own assumptions as to how that value changes between the three. And then they're going to say, oh, I actually want the 199. And so what has happened between the example where you only have one choice and three choices is in the one choice, you are forcing them to make a choice. In the three choices, they are confirming and being comfortable to make the choice themselves. And this is again going back to the idea that people don't actually know what they want. You, as a vendor, have to do your best job to create a comfortable frame for them to navigate that decision for themselves. And a lot of companies don't always think that way.
Ooh, so I want to pick this apart. So, on the concept of frames, I didn't think you were going there with respect to frame. So let's talk about where you went first, offering three different price tiers. We see that often in software packages, and it always says most popular choice, which of course is the one in the middle. And when I look at that, I think, that's too much. You've got entrepreneurs, small business owners who are already overwhelmed with the tens of thousands of choices they have, for example, in a digital marketing solution, a CRM, a this, a that, whatever it is. And now you're giving them three choices to buy. Don't I just want it to be simplified? Here it is. Here's the thing. Here's the price. I want it or not, because of the whole conundrum of choice. Tell us how that factors in.
Yeah, so kind of the best way to put it is it's a little bit like when you go to the store aisle and you look for Tylenol for your cold. And I don't know, and I please, if everyone's listening, please do this. Go look at the Tylenol, look at the price differences, pick it up, take the time to pick it up, look at the ingredients, and ask yourself, does it actually warrant the 50% increase or even sometimes a 100% increase in price? And likely it's not. And what this is really is that when someone when someone's looking at your pricing page and they're ready to press that button, generally speaking, they're already in the belief that they're going to make this purchase. They're pretty ready. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get them comfortable and not force them into a frame. So if you go back to the Tylenol example, if you kind of know Tylenol helps with coughs, but there's just Tylenol, but you know it helps. So you buy it, you're forced into buying something that just says Tylenol, pain relief. When you see a Tylenol with a cough and cold and whatever, it's going to be 50% more. Their brain automatically just makes the justification that that's the symptom that they have, so therefore it must be better, so therefore I will buy it. And so while yes, sometimes, especially when it comes to more earlier stage funnel stuff, I think when you're in the earlier stage of the funnel, you don't want to give people too much choice. That's why when you look at typical blog pages or landing pages, you don't want to have 32 CTAs. You want to have maximum like two. But when it comes to actually making a decision, you do want to give them a little bit of choice, but you want to make those choices clear, right? So what I'm trying to say is like, don't do a $19 one and a $59 one and a $199 and have a feature list that's like one line difference because that's going to be incredibly ambiguous. If you make it very clear that there's like 32 different elements between each one, so it's just like so massive that it's just very easy for them to figure out, they're just going to equate the value to that and then they're going to feel more comfortable with that decision. And again, this really just goes back to what I'm trying to do is when there is only one choice and they don't actually know what they're buying, most people are unhappy with that purchase. And you'll see this in negotiations. There's tons of studies on this. When I offer you, so if say if you and I were working together, Lauren, and you're like, hey Nathan, I'm ready to do this. My monthly retainer is 5 grand, and I immediately go, no problem, zero hesitation. There's like a little part of you that's like upset because
Money on the table, Nathan.
yeah. So you and the wildest part, right, is if we give now that frame two choices. So going back to that scenario, you go, Nathan, $5,000. I go, you know what, Lauren, I would love to do that, but right now I'm a little tight on budget. I'd love to do $4,500. And you go, you know what, Nate, I can do that. You're happier. Now, if you place these two scenarios side by side, you get the 5 grand, you're unhappy. You get the 5 grand offer and a 4,500 counter offer. You accept that counter offer, you're happier. And that's just because you have a frame. Because now I've given you a top and a bottom, and the bottom of that actual one outside of 4,500 is no contract. So it's 5,000, 4,500 no contract, and the first one is 5,000 no contract. And yet you are unhappy in that first one, but you are happier in the second one, even though you're losing $500 on an absolute basis. And this is just, again, like, this is just how humans work. We feel more comfortable when we can create borders. And if we can, and we create it, not like the vendor helps create parameters, but then ultimately the consumer is the one that creates the borders themselves. They go, oh, this must be the bottom line, this must be the top line, and this is the whole thing that we generate our own beliefs. And when we make a decision, we will generate beliefs to enforce that decision. And that's just no matter what. So that's again, like, again, this is all the nuance of consumer psychology. And that's why I think price anchoring and price framing is so important, because price in itself, just that number, can help people feel comfortable with the decision.
So when I think of frame and I'm positioning something, buy it from me, from a client, from whatever else, just marketing really 101. And having been in tech for, well, I always say like since the dinosaurs roamed the earth, right? Silicon Valley, from the rise of .com to .bomb, I was there, going on 101 when you couldn't go anywhere. It was a parking lot, and then you were going 80, no problem, right? So having gone back in time to that, it was always first about like features and functions. And then somewhere around maybe the 2010s ish, I don't know, don't quote me exactly on the timeline, but after about 10 years of having software features and function shoved down our faces, we all said, I don't want to get into a features or function war. I want to be focused on outcomes. And for me, that's the frame. But where I still see so many comparisons happening is that it is a features functions war. Oh, by our CRM, this is how we compare to our number two, competitor or number one competitor. And I'm curious what the consumer psychology is behind that. Is that good for us to see those comparisons? Or are we at a stage now with the busyness and the state of overwhelm and the complexity in our world that, like, just show me the frame, give me the solution. It's this, it does this, wonderful. It'll, make sliced bread for me, wonderful. I want it, I'm in. And then I'll look at what price point I want. Is that like, where are we on that continuum?
I think we're it's still there. And I think the best way for me to frame this uh
Fun, but
is
yeah.
is we go, in the world of too much information, does this really make sense? And I'll go, yes, it still makes sense, but it only makes sense if you tie it in with where you land as a leader in educating your consumer. And this goes to, why does it matter to be first? Because because so say if I was I'm using something ambiguous. Okay, let's use something ambiguous that's a commodity that we all know, but we don't really understand. Paint. Like latex paint, all these kinds of different paints, water resistant paint. There's all these different paint. If you really think about it, it's a daily thing that we have to deal with every single day. We see it everywhere. But do you and I really know the feature benefits between different paints? Absolutely not. But for some reason, if the first company that I land on is, I don't know why I'm blanking out on Bear.
More paints,
Is it
Glidden paints,
BURE? Yeah,
Benjamin Moore. There's
Benjamin
three.
Moore. So if I land on Benjamin Moore, okay, so for whatever reason, the first company when I go shopping is Benjamin Moore, you spend the most time usually with that first company. And what that allows you to do is allows you, the brand, to set the frame. Now, if Benjamin Moore has this more complex formula that does X, Y, Z, and says it does water resistancy and blah blah blah, and you don't have to do one coat and you don't have to do primer, all these things. Guess what I'm going to do when I go look at any other company? I'm going to measure it against what Benjamin Moore told me to measure against. And if you don't match that, I'm going to go, oh, this is kind of weird. And now I have to make a choice. Do I measure it against Benjamin Moore, or do I educate why my second choice may be as good as Benjamin Moore? And most of the time, you don't want to do that because you just want to make a decision, and that's so much more effort. So you're right in the sense that more information is very overwhelming for most people. But if you are the first person that they land on, more education is going to actually frame out your competitors, because essentially what ends up happening is you become the benchmark. And a great example of that is cars, right? So many different things in cars, the type of leather, the wheel, the wheel sizes, the horsepower, the accelerator, all these things. And if you've never bought a car before and the first car brand is you land on teaches you all of these specs, you naturally will go to the next car competitor and match those specs. That's why it's powerful. Because if the other competitor isn't doing one to one, you're winning, or you're making it more difficult for that second competitor to win.
But how do we get to be first, Nate?
Oh,
Right?
that's then very intentional marketing, right? You have to understand where your market, like where your consumers are. And I know that sounds so simple, and it's not, right? Um, for I talk about this all the time. Like 99% of my job as a fractional CMO, which is what I do for a lot of companies, is really just identifying the highest priority channels to begin with. But there's a reason why mature companies are omni-channel. That's because the way I explain it is that if you look at the world of distribution, whether it's TV, podcasts, LinkedIn ads, Facebook ads, Spotify ads, whatever you want, it captures a pool. And in that fishbowl is a portion of your market. And in that portion of your market, there's a portion that actually gets influenced by the advertisements in that channel. And what essentially happens is there are channels that are cheaper and larger with a lot of people who actually are influenced, and that wants to be your first channel. And you want to saturate that channel until you can't squeeze any more juice out of that lemon. Once you do that, you have to find new channels of scalability. And that's why mature organizations are on LinkedIn, are on Facebook, are on Instagram, are on TikTok, or they have a community and they're an association and they're all these places because essentially what you're trying to do is there is a world which you like to call TAM, but there's a part where I like to call accessible TAM, and it's how much through your current channels are you actually accessing of that total addressable market. So sorry, I use the acronym that's TAM.
Sam,
And
Sam, Som, right?
pardon me?
Sam, Som, right? Total
Yeah,
addressable market. Yeah.
yeah.
Serviceable,
And
addressable. Yeah.
And so you have to understand your channels and you have to, again, test to see if it works well for you. Um, and that's how you get first, right? There's no the only way you will ever shortcut this is honestly if you work with an agency that's likely in the exact industry you've worked in and you are starting up a competitor and for some reason they got fired and you get to use them and they have 2 to 3 years of experience of literally executing that one market. That's the very few times you'll actually see results fairly quickly. But if you are a startup and you're doing this internally, either A, you're hiring a marketing manager from a direct competitor and you're bringing them in, they're bringing all that knowledge, or you are testing and you are validating
And grinding.
and branding and
Right.
branding.
Well,
And then there's a whole consumer psychology thing about that. Like how do you brand, how do you become memorable, and how do you, maintain being mentally available for people, which then comes to memory practices and things like that, and creatives. So that it's a good question. It's a complex one, but I think the first thing is just like knowing where your market is.
when I was in Silicon Valley and worked for Sun Microsystems / Oracle, Scott McNealy always said, it's better to be second, not first. And his example that he always gave, I'd rather be Pepsi than Coke, because Coke blazed the path. And having lived on that bleeding edge of technology evangelism for most of my career, lived and died on that edge, in fact, where you have to teach the world you need Coke. You want this brown, sugary soda. You do. You absolutely do. And then you can come in as Pepsi after when the market's been established, undercut it, do some slight difference, and then win people over that have already been convinced they need to buy Coke. And so I just think it's just kind of interesting. And that's sort of always stuck with me where I think, okay, then who do you shadow? And as a marketing tactic, I've given that advice to small business owners and entrepreneurs and said, find a marketing page, a marketing like social media approach, a campaign that you really like. Don't blatantly copy, of course, that's not ethical, but go learn from it and figure out what are the key pieces? What do you think's working for it? And then how do you replicate those pieces that are working? Right? It's all learning. This is what I think most of the AI tools are doing is that they're trying to accelerate that for us and saying, hey, we did some of the learning, we looked at the best of the best, and we're bringing this to you. But then it falls apart because it's too much sameness. I think is that's my theory anyway.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And the one thing that I will say, I think there's reasons to be number one and there's reasons to be number two. And I'd say if you have outside investors, you're gonna have to be one, or you're gonna have to strive to be one. But if you're a private company, there's nothing wrong with being number two. There's nothing wrong being number two. If you don't got to report to anyone else, being number two is just fine.
Yeah, exactly. Now, people are saying, again, people being other marketing experts and whatnot, that ClickFunnels are dead. They're a thing of the past.